Thank you so much for joining us for this afternoon's webinar, Sustainable Leadership in Community Legal Centres. My name's Carly Hanson and I'm one of the Sector Sustainability Coordinators here at Community Legal Centres Queensland. Before we get started, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we're holding today's webinar. In Meanjin, Brisbane, where our office is based, I'd like to acknowledge the Turrbal and the Yagara peoples. I wish to pay my respect to their elders, past, present and emerging, and acknowledge that these are stolen lands and that sovereignty was never ceded. As today's webinar is being viewed by people throughout Queensland and across the country, I'd also really love to pay my respect to the traditional owners throughout the lands of Australia and extend a very warm welcome to any First Nations people who are joining in this session today. So I'm really pleased to welcome Joan Wilson-Jones from JWJ Consulting in Brisbane, who will be presenting today's session. As I mentioned, the session is on sustainable leadership in CLCs. Joan has presented a couple of sessions with us before, so we're really happy to have her back to talk us through some practical strategies and ideas to support leaders to embed excellence across their teams. So this session will look at the organic nature of successful leadership and how we shape our approach to ensure we're managing and moving with the constant demands for change, particularly around COVID and post-COVID times. So this session will cover a range of concepts relevant to leadership, including setting the foundations of leadership and excellence, using the power of appreciation, undertaking courageous conversations, looking at delegation and supporting staff and self through times of crisis, as well as setting future direction in the next normal. So I'll let Joan tell you a little bit more about herself in a moment when I hand over, but before I do that, just some very quick housekeeping. Today's webinar is being recorded and I'll have the recording available hopefully this afternoon or tomorrow morning and send that out to you by email. The PowerPoints and some notes have also been emailed out to everyone who registered this morning. And if you didn't catch the email, you can grab those from the handout section on the GoToWebinar control panel, download them now. We'll obviously have questions. We really encourage engagement through this session, and we do have a slightly longer session, as you will have noticed. So instead of an hour, we've got an hour and a half together. We might pause sort of about midway through just to check how we're going with questions, but otherwise you can type them into the question box at any time and we can discuss those at the end, and we can also unmute your microphone if you'd like to sort of have a discussion with Joan as well. So I might now hand over to Joan to introduce herself in the session, and I'll come back to you sort of midway through or at the end of the session as well for questions. Thanks so much, Joan. Just lost your PowerPoint again there, though.
I'll be back in a minute. I'll turn my camera off then, so you'll just have the PowerPoint. Just quickly wanted to add my welcome to Carly's and also to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which we meet. So just to quick background information for me. So I did work as a manager for many years. So I had a career as a senior manager. So what we're going to talk about today is certainly tried and tested. There are also some theoretical frameworks in there, and everything is very evidence-based. If anyone is interested in further references, please let us know, and I can forward those to Carly for her to forward those out if you are interested. So I'm going to turn my camera off now, and then we will go back to the PowerPoint so that hopefully that will make everything just run a bit more smoothly. So, as Carly said, we're going to be looking at ways to engage and motivate staff. So one of the things about COVID that I have been talking about a lot with managers and leaders is we are hopefully starting to come out of the major disruption of COVID. I know that we are potentially going into a third wave, but hopefully workplaces are starting to establish how they want to look and how they want to interact in the post-COVID period. So this is actually a really a powerful and important time for us to be setting up our teams. I personally don't think we will ever return to the workplace of pre-March 2020, and I think that has opportunity to be a very exciting thing. So we are well placed at the moment to look at how are we going to set up our blended workplaces, if that's what we choose to do. How are we going to look at flexibility, if that's what our staff want, and how are we going to manage that within the operational expectations and requirements of the organisations in which we work. So we're going to look at how we can look at establishing expectations. The power of appreciation, as Carly said, and I think that is one of the most important things. The research certainly shows us that this is probably one of the main motivators for staff. The courageous conversations, as I've termed them there, and that's when we are needing to address underperformance. The real delegation, and I want to put the emphasis on real, and how we do that in terms of how do we pick the people to delegate to and how do we set that up so that we set people up for success. Supporting and debriefing through times of crisis and challenge, and taking it all forward, how we set up for a successful future. And I have allowed some time at the end for us to have a question and answer session, but as Carly said also, if there's questions as we go, please pop those into the chat and we can look at those as we go. So the first thing that's important is the clarity of expectations, or what Brené Brown talks about what will done look like. I do a lot of coaching work in my business, and I work with managers who are looking at underperformance issues and managing staff through those situations. And what I find, and this is going back for about 30 years experience, and what I have found through all of that time, without exception, is that when we have ingrained performance issues, invariably, or absolutely always, in fact, what has happened is that the expectations haven't been clearly set. Now, you may wonder what the visual image is about. Well, first of all, I took that, so I just wanted to showcase it. That's Shane Rose, who rode for Australia in the last Olympics, and that's him competing in New South Wales. But also, it's meaningful for me in terms of when Shane or any of the other cross-country riders go out on course, they know exactly what they have to do. They have to get their horses over the obstacles and still be attached to the horse in some way, shape or form at the other side, but they know exactly how high the jump is. They know what's required of them. And as an ex-show jumper myself, I often used to think to myself when I went into the show jumping arena, wouldn't it be great if it was this clear at work, that this is what I have to do. I have to get over that jump and I have to get over that jump. So when I talk about setting expectations, what I'm suggesting is we look at how high is the bar? Where do we put the bar? And that's going to be determined by a person's level of experience, their position in the organisation or in the team. And so it's potentially an individual thing to a large degree, but important that we have that clarity, because what tends to happen is we can assume that people know. And we assume that people know because they have a duty statement or they have a position description or they applied for the job and it had specific things required of them. But as we will talk about as we go through the webinar, a lot of the terminology in those documents is a bit nebulous. So really important as managers and leaders that we are sitting down with staff and we're clarifying, what does done look like? How high is the jump? And there are two sets of expectations that I want you to think about. And the first one is the non-negotiable expectations. And these are the things that either you or the employers that you work for or the organisations that you're part of, that we have as our conditions of employment. So these are things that we don't put on the table for discussion. We discuss them with staff so that staff are clear. And it might be things like, if you don't come into work, I expect you to contact me. I think that's a fairly fundamental expectation. But we might also want to add to that how we want to be contacted. Do we want to be a telephone call? Do we want a text message? Do we want an email? Does it not matter which one it is, as long as it's received by such and such a time? I was working with a group at one stage and the manager said it's a training team and they, especially if they've got training scheduled, she said, if you're not coming in, I need to know as soon as possible. So she said, if you are unwell during the night, send me a text message. even if it's 2 o'clock in the morning. She said, I won't get that text message until I wake up at 6, but it gives me enough time to sort of set up the day. Now, I use this as an example because I don't know about you, put your manager's hat on right now. Does anybody want a text message at 2 o'clock in the morning? I don't think I do, and you might not want to. It's not right or wrong, it's what works for the person. But we need to put that clearly on the table. So the non-negotiable expectations are the expectations that you have of team members, and then that are about your preferences or the organisation's preferences. And then we have the negotiable expectations, and they're the expectations that we discuss with staff. Ideally, we want all staff to contribute so that we have what we call buy-in, so that we don't set our agreements, we negotiate our agreements so that everybody's on board. And that might be things like, how do we support each other in the team? How do we sort of interact with each other? What are our protocols? How do we determine how we set our priorities as a team? There can be a range of things. I often start those discussions with teams by saying, how do you want to be perceived? If we were going to go out to clients or to other areas of the organisation and ask for words to describe you, what words would you like? And they will come up with things like professional and helpful and knowledgeable, flexible, a range of words. But then we go back and we say, okay, what do we be doing that we will earn these labels? If we want to be flexible, what does flexible look like in our team? What are the behaviours? Or as I have got there heading up the screen, what will done look like? If we want to be seen as courteous, what behaviours are deemed to be courteous in this environment? If we want to be seen as professional, how might we present? How might we look? So, and that's when we can start, sort of looking at, I remember years ago having a team manager come to me when I was managing an office of social security, and they said, our public contact area staff have asked, could they dress a bit more relaxed so that they can be more attuned and in line with our client group? I wanted to hear that request. Can this public contact staff be a bit more relaxed in their dress so they can be more aligned and attuned to our client group? And much to the team manager's surprise, I said yes. And she said, I didn't think it would be that easy. And I said, it's not. But next time you have a team meeting, can you invite me? Meanwhile, until we have that discussion, could you ask that all staff continue to dress in the way they're dressing, which was in a corporate wardrobe, corporate uniform. When we had the team meeting, we went exactly through the process I've just talked about. How do you want our clients to see you? How do you want what words would you want clients to use if they were describing you? Professional, knowledgeable, compassionate, caring. They were all the words that came up. Okay, in order for us to earn those labels, how will we present? What will we be wearing? And I can assure you, we got down to the length of the shorts. They decided that the shirts would have collars, either polo shirts or cotton or whatever fabric button-through shirts, but not T-shirts, because they said T-shirts aren't professional. Now, this is not right or wrong. It's what the group decides and what fits in to what the non-negotiable expectations might be. For example, one of the non-negotiable expectations that I put on the table for that conversation was that everybody would wear closed-in shoes. It's a workplace health and safety requirement. But for the rest, we could be flexible and we could discuss it. So the two sets of expectations are the non-negotiable. This is what we need to do in terms of our contract of employment or my requirements of the team as a manager. And then what are the negotiable expectations? What is it that we can discuss? Important that all the expectations are put into behavioural format. What will we be doing? What will we see? How will that look? What will done look like? And that requires us to define the terms. And this is often the step that's missed. And so managers do a great job of putting together a really great expectations document that uses things like, we'll all be helpful. We will be courteous to each other. We will be respectful. And they're lovely words. I'm going to suggest, though, that we don't all have the same meaning for them. Have a look at the words that I've listed in the notes that hopefully you've all managed to get access to. And the 3 words I've listed there are professional, respectful, and supportive. I'd like you to think of some synonyms for those words. What are some words that, in your view, mean the same or similar to professional? What are some words that might mean the same or similar to respectful, in your view? And what are some words that might mean the same or similar to supportive, in your view? And as you think of some of those words, let's go with professional first, so we don't get too confused. So I invite you to just pop some synonyms from your perspective into the chat. Carly can see the chat. What are some words that you might see as the same or similar to professional? Have we got any words coming up, Carly?
No words yet, but oh, here we go. As soon as I say that, of course, a word comes through. So ethical has come through as a great word there, but, you know, inviting everyone else to pop your words in too. Here we go. So punctual, expert. Anything else out there? Courteous, competent, grammatically correct correspondence.
And all
qualified.
Yeah, I want you to hear them, because all of these are correct, but I want you to hear that they're different. So if we just have an agreement that we'll all be professional, chances are, by no fault of anybody's, we're going to actually just be interpreting it differently. Let's finish with professional. Let's move on to supportive. What are some words for supportive? Because that's something that staff will often ask us. I need you to be supportive. What might be some synonyms for supportive?
So we've got empathetic, patient, positive reinforcement, collaborative, kind, respectful, available, understanding, approaching with kindness, friendly, cooperative, making reasonable adjustments, being flexible.
So again, all correct. All of the words that you've posted into the chat are correct, but I want you to see how they can vary. And I also want you to see or hear how a lot of the terms we use to describe the terms also need to have behaviours put behind them. What does respectful mean? I'd say, I want you to support me. Well, what does that mean? Well, you'll be respectful. Well, what does that mean? And it's important for us to get down to behaviours. So if we're being helpful, what are we doing? I was talking to a manager recently, and they said, I've just got what you mean, because they said, we have an agreement in a small office, a small regional office, that if the counter area is busy, that people in the back office will come forward to help. And they said, but we've never defined busy. We've never put a number around busy. Is that when there's 2 people waiting? Is that when there's 3 people waiting? Is that when there's 1 person waiting? And if all the staff have got a slightly different definition of what busy means, then chances are they're going to respond at different times, which may or may not work or be suitable for the people at the counter. So if we're going to help out when it's busy, what does busy mean? A question to ask staff: when you say you want support, what does that look like for you? Because what's support to one person can be micromanagement to another. And what behaviours do our clients deem to be professional? And so what we start to do is we now start to narrow this down. We drill it down so that we've got behaviours that are no longer open to interpretation. If I have an agreement that if there is 2 people waiting at the public contact area that aren't currently being served, we've made a decision that that equates to busy, and someone from the back office will come forward to help out. The reason it's important to discuss the behaviours is so that we can get buy-in, so that everyone has an opportunity to get an understanding and have a point of view. I would strongly recommend that we document the agreement, and we document it in behavioural terms. So this is what we'll be doing when we're being helpful. This is what we'll be doing when we're being respectful. This, again, helps to avoid confusion and miscommunication through just different interpretations. And as part of that conversation, that we discuss rewards and possible consequences. When we achieve this, how will we recognise it? And if we don't achieve this, what might happen? There's an emphasis on possible consequences and what might happen, because when we don't achieve it, there could be external factors that were outside staff members' control. So we don't automatically impose consequences, but I'm going to suggest we automatically impose rewards when people meet the expectation. And I want you to note the bottom line there on the slide. Without an agreement, there can be no feedback. And I think this is a really important one to remember, because if we haven't got an agreement, then by default, we will go to opinion. Again, another story from one of my workshops, and a young man on a workshop one time, young for me, so he's probably in his early 20s, and he said, you know, one of the problems is that, you know, you can have these discussions, and my girlfriend's recently moved in, and she and I have got an agreement on, you know, that we'll keep the kitchen tidy. But I go in there and there's all sorts of, you know, there's dishes places, and he said it doesn't look tidy to me. And I'm going to suggest that the problem was that they didn't define tidy. For her, as it turns out, because I said, have you had conversations? She said, oh, yeah, she said she'll clean it up before we go to bed at night and make sure the kitchen's good for breakfast the next morning. But I like things to be tidy as we go. There just needed to be a conversame in the workplace. And by the way, I'm sure we've all come across that age-old dilemma of, you know, we'll keep the kitchen tidy in the workplace, and there's all sorts of different definitions of that. And in terms of the performance hierarchy, just sort of looking at how things pan out, the bottom layer there of the triangle is where someone maybe lacks the knowledge, skills or confidence. And at this point, the person requires training. So it's not just about, you know, performance feedback or performance management at this point. This is around developing a training and reinforcement plan. And the reinforcement plan is really important, because we often send people off to training, and then when we bring them back, we haven't potentially orchestrated for them to have sufficient work in the categories of the training that allows them to have that practice. And we all get better by practice. The middle area, the blue area, is where the person, we know they have the skills and knowledge, but they're still not meeting the expectations. And this is where the agreement or the performance feedback comes into play. The first question is, have we discussed the expectations? Is it clear to the person what I expect of them? And I'm going to suggest, if we haven't had a specific conversation about it, it's important not to assume it's clear. So noticing performance in the blue zone might be a cue to us to add that to the agreement or have a conversation around what my expectations are. If we've had the conversation and we've got the agreement, now it's a time for performance feedback. And the feedback is always in relation to what I saw or heard, what our agreement is, and how the two match or don't match. The red part at the top is where there has been a breach of the workplace contract, or where there has been behaviour that would be considered to be against the law. So that now is known as misconduct. There's no longer a performance issue, and this needs to be escalated for appropriate action within the organisation, which might in fact be dismissal. important again that staff know that that's the case. One situation that I've been had some contact with was a case where it was shown quite categorically that a staff member had been downloading pornography on their work computer. That is a breach of the contract, and it's also illegal. That person was marched off the premises that very afternoon once there was sufficient evidence that was able to show categorically that the pornography had been downloaded by the staff member concerned. So we've got 3 levels. We've got not quite sure what we're doing yet, maybe a new starter, or someone who's had a major change in their work expectations, and that's developing a training plan and looking at how we're going to make sure that they can consolidate that learning when they return to work. The middle part is the part where we're looking at to have conversations and ensure that we've got agreements and expectations in place. In the top part, that would be escalated higher in the organisation. So this little model is an adaptation from the Hershey Blanchard situational leadership model. So you may have seen the Hershey Blanchard model. I have used it a lot in leadership training, and in this context of what we're talking about today, I want us to look at how we would use it in terms of preparing to provide feedback. So we have, and I'm going to be starting from the right-hand side of the screen at the bottom, the one that has the orange coloured box and the orange ready coloured arrow pointing to it. And we'll call this segment 1. And in segment 1, our staff member has or doesn't have knowledge. So they might not have any knowledge of the job, or they may have a theoretical knowledge. For example, they might be a new graduate and they finished their degree, but they haven't yet had an opportunity to transfer that into practical skills. So their knowledge levels may or may not be there. However, the critical part here is their skill level isn't. So if they've just come out of university or out of a training course, they might have it all in theory, but not in practice. And their attitude is, as a result of that, their attitude is not necessarily conducive to them being able to confidently do a good job independently. So the attitude in this segment can be lack of confidence, because they're learning what to do and they're not sure, or as we are seeing from time to time, what we might refer to as an overconfidence. So I've come out of university, I've got my piece of paper, I know what I'm doing, I haven't yet had an opportunity to transfer those skills into the workplace, but I haven't really come to realise that. So we can see then sometimes staff members who are going off doing things, but may not be correct. In that segment 1, it's a training, coaching and support segment. So this is where we need to set a training program, a consolidation program, as I was talking about before. There's a little point in providing feedback around underperformance in this segment because the person hasn't got the ability to meet the performance requirements yet. However, it's important that those performance requirements are set, that they know what it is they are needing to aim at being able to do so that it's consistent with their level in the team and their pay scale. So that's the first segment. I'm going to go up now to the blue one. So in segment 2, the person has the knowledge. So they've either acquired that through their studies or through their experience on the job. But we know they've got the knowledge. We know they know how to do it. And we know that they have had the training, coaching and support to enable that knowledge to be transferred into skills. So they know how to do it. We've got a thumbs up there. However, the concern here is the attitude. And this might be an attitude of obstruction, or it might be an attitude of lack of enthusiasm. We will know about this attitude through things like, well, why do I always have to do this? And how come I always get these jobs? And I'm fed up of having to carry the team. And where conversations are showing a reluctance. This one, it's important for us, first of all, to inquire what's happening. When I asked you if you would take on those 2 cases for us this week, you came back and said to me, how come I have to do all this stuff? Why can't someone else? What's going on? that's not like you, or, you know, these cases are well within your skill level and your level within the organisation, but we need to inquire. We need to check what our agreement is around attitude and interactions. And if we don't have an agreement around that, we might need to discuss that and to add that to our agreement, because that then allows us to have feedback and potentially to look at what the consequences might be. So, you know, that might be that we're going to look at some performance management processes. It might be that we need to document it, that, you know, there can be a range of consequences. But the important part in here is that we are addressing that attitude. Now, managers often say to me, I've got some great staff. They meet all their KPIs. They do this, they know they're great, except they just don't get on with their colleagues. And my response is always, getting on with your colleagues is part of our workplace agreement. That's part of the attitude. So in the blue area, in segment 2, sending someone to more training courses is counterproductive. They've already done their training. What we need now is to have a clear, frank and compassionate conversation around their attitude. Moving over to the left, we have the pink segment, which is segment 3. In segment 3, again, we have staff members that have the knowledge, they have the skills, and their attitude is also hampering their performance. But whereas in the blue zone, the attitude is one of discontent or obstruction, in the pink zone, the attitude is a lack of confidence. Now, I've seen a lot of this happening with the COVID lockdowns. For people who are used to being in the workplace and working with a team where they perhaps have someone near them who they can say, you know, I'm just checking, do I do this? Do I do that? You know, and then suddenly they're working from home on their own, and the person that they've been checking in with isn't there. And so a lot of people have found that their confidence has really taken a bit of a battering through this. In the pink section, what's important is reinforcement, so consolidation, so an opportunity to do some of those tasks or those sorts of cases to be able to build up their confidence, and appreciation. Well, you know, you organised the divisional meeting last month and you did a great job. The venue was absolutely appropriate and the catering was good, and there was, you know, we had all of the technical equipment that we needed to be able to verbalise and reassure that what the person has been doing has actually been working. So no point sending this person to a training course either, because they have the skills and knowledge. What we want to work with them here is with their attitude. Whereas the person in the blue zone, it's in a conversation about how they address their attitude. And the person in the pink zone, it's what can we do to help you to build up that confidence. And then we have the green zone, bottom left. They know what they're doing, they know how to do it, and their attitude is fantastic. And this is the appreciation delegation quadrant or segment. So these are our top operators. These are our, you know, great employees, and these are the people who we need to remember to show appreciation, because these are the people sometimes that we forget to do that. They're so good, we give them a lot of the work to do. We know they're going to do a great job. They always do a great job, and then we forget to specifically acknowledge that. And one of the things I'm seeing is that people are dropping from green to blue. They're basically becoming a bit disenchanted with how they are treated in the workplace. And the other thing that's happening is, because these are such good operators, if we're not careful as managers, we can inadvertently overload them and they can end up in the blue zone with burnout. So that attitude change in the blue zone can be a bit of a red flag for us as managers, that this person is no longer coping as well as they were. So the green zone is where we delegate. The green zone is the only place we delegate, because the person in the orange zone is still learning. The person in the blue zone has some attitude adjustment to undertake, and the person in the pink zone has some confidence to build. It's the person in the green zone that we know we can delegate work to and have a confidence that it will be done well and it will be done in the time frames. So that's the zone that we are going to highlight. Now, what tends to happen when we delegate, there's a couple of things if we're not careful. And the first one is that we give the person the task and we've got every confidence they'll do it, and we leave them with it. And then unfortunately what happens is because they haven't had the clarity and the guidance, they do it in their way and it isn't what we were expecting, and then there's disappointment. The other thing that can happen is that the exact opposite. I ask this person to take on the task. However, I keep checking in every 5 minutes to make sure they're doing it how I do it. And both of those approaches can be really detrimental to the relationship, but also to allowing the person to grow and develop. So in delegation, it's important to set the what. What does done look like? What do I need this to look like? How long do I need this report to be? You know, what does the conference need to achieve, and what does it need to look like? What are our considerations in terms of the venue? How are we going to approach this project, and you know, what's the end result? And the why, and sometimes this is the one we can forget. Why do we need to do it this way, or why do we need to do it to that end? So that we're putting some context around it. And then, of course, when is the deadline? And what we now understand is when I've clearly set the what, the why, and the when, the person is in a position to step up and develop the how, which then gives them that sense of ownership and autonomy. Really important that we've also clarified for the person what support looks like for them in this context. So if we're delegating something to them that's fairly new for them, they might want some more regular check-ins with us around it. So from their point of view, what would be optimal for them? But then also, of course, our requirements in terms of having knowledge of where the work is at and what's happening. So there might be a negotiation that needs to happen there between how often the person wants us to check in and how often we need to check in, so we've got our finger on the pulse and we're clear about what's happening. Once we've said all of that, kind of important to get out of the person's way and let them do the task. Now, what sort of things do we delegate? It depends. If this person is looking to progress in their career and they're wanting to do some higher level work, that might be something that they ask for. Not appropriate for us to be asking people to work above their pay level. However, if someone says to me as the manager, I really want to have a go at this so that I can get some experience which will help me when I apply for higher level jobs, that's when I might negotiate for how we're going to manage that in terms of their workload and taking on extra things, but could then be that I perhaps even delegate parts of my role that they are willing to take on that allows me to see them in operation, and then I can give them an honest and factual reference. The important thing here is that we're working with the team member to make sure that they're not becoming inadvertently overloaded, which might mean that there needs to be some add here and take from there. But really important that we only delegate to people in the green zone. And in terms of crisis and challenge, it's an interesting thing at the moment, and I heard someone speak a while ago, and they started the speech with, "We are living with a rate and speed of change that has never been experienced by humankind before." And then they paused, and then they said, "And it's the slowest it will ever be." So we are working in a time where technology is driving change, and the change speed and complexity are going up all the time. As managers, it's really important that we are keeping an eye on ourselves and our staff. The model on the screen in front of you now is one that looks at how we respond to difficulty, crisis and challenge. The green dotted line is our healthy levels of cortisol. Cortisol is one of our stress hormones. We have cortisol in our system all the time when we are healthy, and it's cortisol that motivates us, and when we get up in the morning, it's cortisol is one of the chemicals that's helping that to happen. The wavy orange line that's going up and down, that represents our ancestors. And when I talk about our ancestors, I'm talking about our ancestors way, way back when we were living in tribal communities, and hunting and gathering. And so you might see that, you know, one of our ancestors gets up in the morning and you know, they're wandering through the jungle and things are getting a little bit more intense because they need to keep an eye on what's happening. So they're feeling a little, the stress levels are going up a bit. And then they get to a point where they meet a saber-toothed tiger and they go into fight or flight. And what our ancestors did was they used to fight or flight. They would either run back to the safety of the tribe, and when they did that, they burned the chemicals that they produced to put them into the fight or flight state. So they are in a heightened emotional state. The act of running back to the tribe actually utilised those chemicals, and by the time they got back to the tribe, those chemicals had either returned to the healthy level or maybe even, you know, were a little bit and underneath that. We might be, you know, they might be a little bit worn out, but their chemicals have been burnt. Or they stayed and fought the saber-toothed tiger, and it was the act of fighting. It's that physical movement that burns the chemicals. And if they won, they went home triumphant with dinner. If they lost, well, they probably didn't care much because they're just about to get eaten by a saber-toothed tiger. But in terms of fighting and winning, they were using the chemicals. And then they had a period of sort of quiet time, and then maybe there'd be another incident in the jungle, or maybe they met someone from the warring tribe across the hill, but the same thing happened. They went into fight or flight and they used the chemicals by actually running or hitting. The red line that goes up and then does a sudden drop, that's us now. So we get up in the morning and then, you know, we've slept in because the alarm didn't go off and the traffic was bad getting to work, or I'm working from home, but I'm having some problems with my connection and I can't get onto the internet. And then, you know, there's a meeting that I had forgotten about, and at the meeting, these things come up that I hadn't got finished yet and I was supposed to have finished. Anyway, a range of things happen all through the day. We actually get little mini fight or flight episodes all through the day. For some people, it's every few seconds. And instead of having an opportunity to run back to the tribe or fight the saber-toothed tiger, we just get on with the next thing. And so what's happening, these chemicals are accumulating. And every hit of cortisol in our system that isn't utilised by physical activity stays in our system for 13 hours. And for 13 hours, it's messing around with our heart rate, it's playing around with our respiration, that's retarding our digestive system, it's cutting off access to our high-level thinking. So what we see with stress-related behaviours is that they are not our normal relaxed behaviours. So as we go further up that red line, our behaviours change and we become more stressed. And it's the behaviour changes that are our warning. Once we get to the top, and that top is different for everyone, but what psychiatrists now are pretty much in agreement about is that if we put every human being under enough pressure, every human being will break. Some will take longer than others, but basically if we are all put under pressure, we will all break. And that's because we will go into adrenal failure or burnout or breakdown. And then what happens is our adrenal glands stop working. Our levels of cortisol and adrenaline fall below the healthy levels, and we now have autoimmune disease in place. And that might be things like chronic fatigue, thyroid issues, irritable bowel syndrome, and also added celiac to the list, because every time we go into fight or flight, our digestive system is interfered with. And in an article in the Lancet a couple of years ago, they have also now aligned type 2 diabetes. So there's a whole range of illnesses that come about because of our body being under stress. And it's that line that's going up, the line that's starting off with the green dotted line and going up to where the orange arrow is pointing to the adrenal burnout or failure. That's the line we want to watch in ourselves and others, because that's where behaviour is changing. And the quicker we respond, the less we have to do. So really important with your members of your team to notice or know what people's normal behaviour is. How do they behave when they're doing okay? And you'll see I've got normal in inverted commas because not all of us have the same normal behaviour. People who are more extroverted in their personality, their normal behaviour can be to be quite outgoing and to be quite talkative. It's not always, but it can be. People who are more introverted in their personality, their normal behaviour might be to be a bit quieter or even a bit more withdrawn. When the introvert personalities become stressed, they can often turn into the life and soul of the party. And people think, oh, they're doing better. In fact, they're not. It's a big red flag. People with more extroverted personalities, when they're not doing so well, they can become quiet. So it's for our team, understand with your team, how are they when they're doing okay? And then, how are they when they're not doing okay? What changes am I going to see? What changes might they see in me? What happens when we're going up that red line? Understand what support looks like to them. If I observe behaviours that are consistent with what I now understand to be you not doing so well, what do you need from me? What does support look like? Where performance is being impacted, then discussions need to happen. So where we have noticed a change in performance, where they're not people meeting targets, or their disposition has changed, or they're not interacting in the same way, that's when we need to have a conversation. If relationships at work are being impacted, it's when we need to have a conversation. You might also want to discuss with people what other support options there are, in terms of things like an employee assistance program, or where there might be external options. And the last dot point I really want to emphasise, it's really important to remember you're the manager and not the person's counsellor. So we focus, as managers, we focus on what's happening at work. Doesn't mean that we're not there to listen if they choose to talk, but our job is to look at how do we support you to be able to be the best and healthiest version of yourself at work. This is a particularly difficult line for anybody who actually is a counsellor. So a lot of psychologists and social workers are becoming managers. Great in terms of my perspective. They have a lot of wonderful tools to bring to the role, but it can be hard for them when staff are going through difficult times, because they're skilled and trained to work with people in the crisis. However, they're not being paid at that point too. And if I step over the line and become the counsellor, I've now left the person without a manager. And I really want to emphasise that. So in terms of supporting through difficult times, understand what do I see when you're doing okay? What do I see when you're not doing okay? What would support look like for you? And of course, for you as managers, you are particularly looking at, is this impacting on performance? Is this impacting on relationships? Some other tools that are available to you, monitor the leave trends. So an increase in sick leave, or an accumulation of holidays, all of those things can just be flags for you. So someone has an increase in sick leave, or they've set a sort of a bit of a sick leave pattern that you're noticing. So really important to just be keeping a check on those things. And at the moment, because for 2 years we probably couldn't go anywhere, a lot of people didn't take holidays. And there's two downsides to that, probably more, but at least two. First one is a lot of people have not had any time away from work for over 2 years. This is actually a very, very potentially dangerous situation in terms of people's health and well-being. So really important to keep an eye on what leave people have. The other thing, of course, is accumulation of holidays is actually quite a large financial situation for organisations as well. So, but from a staff perspective, just making sure that if you know you've got staff members with excess leave, and excess leave would be probably anything that's, if they haven't taken leave in the last 2 years, they've got excess leave, and that we're talking to staff about taking some holidays, taking some downtime. Always check in after work peaks. At the moment, we're seeing a rate of work that's probably, just going up and up. So just being aware of that as managers, that we are asking often more of people, but where there might have been a particularly busy time, you might have particularly busy times during the year, just so that we are checking in. That we're recognising and rewarding. This has been shown as one of the main motivators for people, and really important that we're asking the question, when you do a good job. How do you want me to acknowledge that? Some people want to be acknowledged in public. Other people would be mortified by being acknowledged in public. Some people want to have, you know, sort of maybe that in writing, send me an email or something so I've got something tangible. Other people want to have the conversation. Some people, you know, a reward for them would be giving opportunities to be on, you know, working parties or think tank groups for other people that would actually just add to their already busy lives and feel like a punishment. I remember a friend of mine many years ago working on a national project which required her to be flying around the country, and this went on for about 4 or 5 months, and she was very rarely home, but she got to fly to a lot of interesting places in Australia, and she got to do some really great stuff and did a fabulous job of the project, as no one was surprised to learn. She's very dedicated, and her manager, quite inadvertently, as a reward, organised business class ticket for her to fly to Canberra, where he had organised a gold pass to a conference, a 3-day conference, fascinating conference. But as she said to me, I haven't really seen my husband and kids for 4 months. I would have just liked a couple of days off. And I have no doubt that that manager organised that thinking he was doing something really great, but he hadn't checked. And actually what would have been a big reward for her was a lot easier and a lot cheaper to organise. So check in with people. What are rewards for you? How do you want me to acknowledge that? Across the team, normalise conversations around team health and wellbeing. Encourage people to talk about the things that they're doing to look after themselves, and encourage teams to check in with each other so that we make it a normal part of the team interaction. And of course, as the manager, we will most influence by modelling the behaviour we want. So it's important for managers that they're demonstrating the self-care, that you're leaving early sometimes, that you're taking lunch breaks, that you're discussing challenges in proactive and ways that are looking at solutions. Obviously, we don't want a manager telling everybody all their problems. What we do want, though, is a manager showing that they're human, and that, you know, this is what I'm doing and this is what I'm looking at. I was very pleased to arrive at an organisation one day to run a workshop, and I arrived at about 9:30, just as the CEO arrived in his running gear. And I said, "Oh, you ran into work today?" He said, "I run into work once a week." And he said, "I always try to make sure that I arrive about now so that people will see me, because there's no point in me telling people to look after themselves and to get exercise if they don't see me doing it." And that's what I'm talking about. And then in taking it all forward, important that there are regular one-on-one discussions. How regular? What's regular? Regular will be determined by the level of experience and the staff members. So for new staff members, regular might actually, for really new staff members, regular might be once a day. For people who are fairly new but have been here a while and starting to settle in, we'd push that out to once a week. And then a bit time later, it might go to once a fortnight. No matter how experienced and how long your staff members have been there, I would suggest it's no longer than once a month. And that's just a sit down. It might be 10, 15 minutes for your more experienced staff members, but that's just the check-in. How are we going? Anything that you need to let me know about. So that people you're having that connection and you're watching and observing. The other thing that's really important is, and we talked about in leadership training and management training, the open door policy. And it was always explained to me that the door is open so that people can come in and let the manager know what's going on. I'm just going to just move that a bit. I think the door is open so that the manager can step out and meet the staff. Make a point of checking in with people regularly. How are you going? What's happening? Anything I need to know about? Means that if things are becoming challenging, you'll hear about it a lot earlier. But also it's that connection with people that's building the trust. Review the team agreements and individual expectations, and I'd say at least half yearly, but you might need to do it more frequently if there's been major change, or if there's been an influx of new staff, so if you've had a fairly high staff turnover, because it's important that we're discussing those expectations with new staff members and we're not just assuming that they will know. and encourage suggestions and solutions for all concerns raised. So it's one thing for people to bring concerns. As a manager, it was always one of my policies with staff that they also bring me some ideas for solutions. And they mightn't get everything they've asked for, because sometimes that's not able to be organised. But if I know what a solution is for you, I'm much more able to formulate my response, taking that into account. Reward concerns that are raised assertively. Assertively means they are coming to you with facts. They're not just having a bit of a whinge and a moan. Now, we all know when we're whinging and moaning, because we get the whingy, whiny voice, and we start saying things like, it's not fair and this shouldn't happen here, which is different to, I just need to let you know that, you know, the phone calls seem to have gone up exponentially. We used to get this many phone calls on average every day, and over the last 2 weeks, this has escalated to this many phone calls on average every day. Some of the things we've thought about in terms of how we might manage that is this, this, and this. And that's a lot different to the phones are ringing off the hook and we don't know what to do. So invite people to come in and talk about how things could be improved, but really important that they're also coming forward with some ideas for how that might happen. And reflect, review and refine. Reflect on how things are. And a lens through which to reflect that I would suggest is what's going well? How are we going to keep that going? What could be better? What could we put in place? Avoid the temptation to fall into the trap of reflecting through the lens of what went wrong. When we start looking for things that are going wrong, we'll find them, trust me, but also what happens is we produce chemicals that cut down our creativity and our resilience. When I look at through a different lens of just how could I improve this, all it is looking at the same thing through a different perspective, but what went wrong will defeat me. How can I improve this will motivate me. Review operations and processes, especially during times of change. But as we're coming back into the workplace post-COVID, we're setting up a new world of work. So it's important that we are reviewing regularly. Is this the best way we can do it for now with what we have? You know, have we taken into account this? And that allows us to incrementally and consistently work on refinement, which means that as we're going forward looking at ways for things to be even better. Helps with the motivation, but of course for everybody, you and your staff, but also means that we are looking at the whole future world of work as something that we can be putting together in a whole new way. As someone who has been in management roles now for some 40 years, I have seen many crises. I've gone through a lot of government changes that have changed the way organisations needed to operate and respond. I've gone through a lot of global situations, and COVID, like all of the others, didn't give us a lot of warning going into it. A lot of our organisations went from being in the office to 100% working from home in a matter of hours. It's a very short time frame to be able to do that. And many organisations did it incredibly well, and I think that's something that we can feel proud of. What COVID is giving us, which I've never seen before, is time coming out. It's giving us time to plan, and it's giving us time to think, and it's giving us time to look at what do we want our world of work to look like, and how can we put that together? How will our agreements match that and support that? How will our interactions encourage that? How do we build what's going to be the world of work of the future that's going to encourage people to be motivated and to achieve, but also allow us the flexibility that perhaps is what people are looking for in terms of the life balance and health and well-being. I now would like to open the forum for questions. So as Carly said before, feel free to pop questions in the chat, which she will read out so everyone knows, and I'm happy to respond to those. Or I think, Carly, you also mentioned people can put microphones on. Is that true? And we can ask the question verbally.
Yes, thank you so much, Joan. Yes, that is True. So if you do want to ask a question, just use the hand button on the GoToWebinar control panel and I can unmute you so you can ask your question, provided you've got access to a mic through your computer or laptop. So while people are thinking about those questions and putting them into the chat, there have been a couple that have come through already. So the first one from Nicholas is, how do you deal with employees who might be a little bit sneaky or evasive? So making it a little bit difficult for managers to assess performance without micromanaging them.
First of all, Nicholas, thanks for the question. And sometimes we might need to kind of micromanage them in a way. Now, important thing with management, and particularly performance management, is that we're working in facts, that we're not working in assumptions. So if I suspect that someone is doing something that I'm not aware of, going home early and not telling anybody, for example, when they're working from home, not being available all the time, and we're not sure whether that's because they are having computer problems or because they've ducked out to the shops. It's important that I do actually follow that up and that I am checking in. So some managers will sort of feel like it is micromanagement. I'm going to suggest it's actually management in that instance. Because the other thing is, and I want to put this on the table, as managers, it's our job to catch people doing things right as well. And I'm not able to do that unless I'm checking in regularly. So if I have a suspicion or suspect that one of my staff members is not perhaps putting in the effort I have asked them to do, or they're not putting in the hours, then I'm going to be checking in on that. And one of the things that often comes up is, that the timesheets aren't accurate. They're claiming hours they haven't worked. So I might need to have, if the person's working from home, there might need to be phone calls at strategic times to just check that they're there. Also, be aware, where staff are working from home, that we're setting work and timeframes that we want to finish. So we go with work from home. It's important that we shift from input to outcomes. So it's not so much how much time you spend on it, but this is what I need to see, because this is tangible. What I see is tangible. And so that allows me to then gather some information and then to have the conversation. And there's a difference between I don't believe you're putting in the hours that you're saying you are, and I rang you on Teams at 3:30 and there was no response. Now what happens is the staff member knows that they're not just being left to their own devices, and it's important that we don't. If I ring them at 3:30 and they're there, it gives me an opportunity to check in. How are you doing? If I have suspicions around staff and I've got, starting to sort of see that there's a pattern, they're the staff members I'd be encouraging managers to be encouraging back into the office as soon as we can. I think we are starting to, depending on what happens with this third wave, we probably are getting to a point where we will be looking to go back to what the work from home requirements were before COVID, which was that the person had a good work history and that they were meeting expectations. But first of all, I have to ask myself, what evidence have I got that I don't think that they're fulfilling what they're saying they're doing? And then what avenues have I got for me to check? And the checking is not, I'm not doing it to catch you, I'm doing it to clarify. And then if I've got it wrong, it's given me an opportunity to check in. If I'm now starting to see that, there is a pattern forming or there's examples, I've now got something tangible to talk to the person about. What I have found over the years of working with many, many managers, that just letting it go and not doing anything rarely has a positive outcome. Nicholas, I hope that's helped.
Wonderful, thank you. Lots of questions coming through, so thank you for that. And just a reminder that we will run until 3 today, so we will hopefully have time to get to all of these questions. Just a quick one, which is, do you have a rule of thumb, I suppose, around what a good number of people for one manager to supervise would be? So how many direct reports might be appropriate in a team setting?
Yeah, it's a great question. I wish I had a great answer. I think it depends on a lot of factors, and not the least being the nature of the work, and in terms of complexity and variation. So if I've got team members that are all doing different things, I would probably suggest less direct reports than if I've got a team of people who are doing similar roles, and that we can have a team agreement around that. Optimally, I don't know that there is an actual figure, but I think once we probably get to around the 6 to 10, that's quite a large section of my time. So I then need to, as a manager, be thinking, okay, how do I balance what other tasks I might have? And for many of you, especially those of you who have legal backgrounds and are lawyers, you possibly still have a legal caseload to manage as well as being a manager. So that's what I need to start looking at in terms of feasible elements. Am I able to manage this, or do we need to sort of start looking at how we maybe, you know, group people together, whether there's a structure of, you know, a line structure. And I know, you know, for a lot of organisations, they might have 50 people in the division, but they've got some team leaders and they've got some managers and then a director. Now, these aren't things that we can just put in place because we aren't necessarily in the position that says this is how the hierarchy will be and this is how the org chart's going to look. So, but having those contemplations is ways that may be representing some of those things in the organisation. But I think it depends on so many things and it's quite an individual. But the things I would ask you to consider is what other non-management tasks am I being required to do? And is there a percentage? Am I 60% manager, 40% lawyer, if legal is my background? And then how does that translate into me being able to put time into each team member? One of the other things that people fall into is that sometimes it's easier for me to do the tasks than to manage someone else to do them. And so I just sort of keep reverting to taking on roles that perhaps were my previous role or within a previous level of expertise. I'm going to suggest I call this martyr management. And at some point we do need to bite the bullet and say, okay, this is my management role and I'm not doing anybody any favours if I'm taking jobs off them because I believe I can do it better. And that's where the delegation model comes in again. So it's to think about, but no, to my knowledge, no one's come up with a perfect formula yet.
Wonderful, thank you, and great reflection around lawyers who are managers who may also still be managing clients and seeing clients and managing a caseload, because that certainly does happen within the community legal sector. Yes. A couple of people have asked whether you've got any suggestions for resources that might be useful in team reflection or reviewing. Have you got any links or anything you would be able to share with us, Joan?
In terms of resources, look, there's heaps of stuff on the net, and I'm happy to do some searches and send some stuff to Carly. And because there's a lot of new stuff coming out that's coming out post-COVID. Simon Sinek has some great stuff. Simon's a theorist and author, and his teams have been working from home for about 20 years. So he had set a pattern of this long before COVID, but he's got some really great sort of models around how we keep people connected and how we keep teams connected. And of course, the importance of, even when we're working remotely, that we orchestrate for face-to-face. So I'd suggest Google Simon Sinek, S-I-N-E-K. There's also I'm trying to remember his name and I'll find it and send it to Carly, but there's and this has also arisen through COVID, a fellow who's doing some really great work. What is these cards here? Some really great work around, Carl Sagan. Here he is, C-A-R-L-S-A-G-A-N. He's doing some really great work around connection through virtual meetings and virtual interactions. And I think as we move into the future, there's going to be more of that than there has been in the past. And then you've got some good old stalwarts, you know, like just some of the really great management theorists. Stephen Covey's got some great stuff. So, you know, one of the great things about management and leadership is it doesn't necessarily date. We're talking about human interaction and people. So even things that haven't been released in the last few years can still have some really great impact. Off the top of my head, I mean, there's a whole range of things, but some fabulous resources out there now, and we're getting more and more, which is also really good because more and more research is being done, and looking at how, you know, how we can be better managers, I guess, and better leaders. One of my favourites is not a new book either, but it's Leadership in the New Science by Margaret Wheatley. She's a physicist, and so has put a lot of her research skills into the compilation of her book. And there's a woman by the name of Margot Parnes, who is an Australian woman out of Sydney, and she also has some really practical, to me it is anyway, practical, hands-on communication and management ideas and frameworks. So yeah, there's a lot out there.
Wonderful. And similarly, people asking for resources for first-time leaders and also sample team agreements and others. So hopefully among some of those authors that you've mentioned, Joan, some of that other material would also be covered or available. But if you have any others you want to send through, I'm happy to forward them on to the group.
Yeah, I'll have a look. The team agreement stuff, and sadly, is pretty light on. So what we've spoken about today is potentially, most of it I would say is mine. Not that that's a bother, and I don't, you know, I mean, feel free to share it and expand on it. Because I just haven't seen a lot come out on the team agreements. There's a lot on the interactions. But that, all of that stuff we did it right at the beginning about clarifying terms and defining terms. I'm not saying there isn't anything out there. I haven't come across anything in a theoretical sense yet.
Great.
But that's from my model of just being practical and having been a manager for a long time and seeing how easy it is for things to get confused if we don't clarify it. I'm also a mother, and that stuff works for teenagers as well. When you start getting the on what a tidy bedroom looks like, you're going to have a lot more success with getting them to clean up. Trust me. Yeah.
And obviously that kind of document, a team agreement or a team charter, doesn't need to be an external facing document. It can just be something that the team develops as an internal resource.
It's an internal resource. It's just for the team. I do suggest documenting it so that everyone's on the same page and we're not leaving it to memory. And as I said earlier, documenting it in behavioural terms. So as soon as you see words like respect, professional, courteous, kind, compassionate, they're words that we need to clarify, and they're words that we need to define in terms of what, in this organisation, in this team, what behaviours would constitute that label.
Great, thank you. And Lauren's just wondered, again, if you could clarify the spelling of some of those authors' names, that would be really helpful just to assist with the Googling. Yes, wonderful.
Why don't I send you a list when we finished, which I'm for you to send out, Carly, is that okay?
Absolutely, that would be great. And I'll flick that out with the recording probably tomorrow morning or sometime tomorrow. Lovely. So got a question that's come through, which is from Andrea. So what would you recommend a leader does when they provide feedback to suggest improvements in a staff member's approach to their work, but the feedback isn't taken on board? The staff member might acknowledge the request to act in a certain way, but then the issue comes up again. You know, could be something, as an example, you know, suggesting that spell check is used in draft legal advices before sending them to be settled. You know, not major things necessarily, but, you know, can be frustrating for managers having to repeat themselves with those little things. Absolutely.
So first of all, really, really important that we're talking in behavioural terms. So, you know, I'm probably sounding like a broken record at the moment, but it's so easy for us as human beings to default to opinion, because that's how we normally talk. Oh yeah, I really like your hair, that shirt looks really great, that was a beautiful meal. They're all opinion, there's nothing wrong with them, but in terms of feedback, they're not feedback. So it's kind of like we have to keep a check on ourselves that we're keeping it to actual factual stuff. So rather than you've made mistakes in the report again, I've got a copy of the report that you gave me yesterday, and I've just gone through and highlighted the areas where there's spelling errors or grammatical errors. Some of these things I'm sure would have been picked up in a spell check if you'd done a spell check. Remember last week we talked about you doing a spell check. So we take it back to the conversation. We keep coming back to the facts. And I mean, for many of you having legal backgrounds, we're talking about the evidence. And we have the evidence there. It's not enough to say that you weren't professional in that phone call. Rather, it's I couldn't help but overhear the phone call. What I heard you say was, don't ask me, how would I know? Can you tell me what was going on? So the first thing is that the person might say, I was talking to my brother. Okay, well, you are within earshot of clients. So, that's probably not an appropriate conversation. I'd ask you not to talk to your brother like that when you're at work. No judgment about how we talk to our brother, but what are our clients hearing? Or the next thing might be, well, I didn't know the answer. Well, okay, so when we go back to the agreement, how did we say we were going to clarify that? And then if it happens again, we start talking about what there might be some potential consequences. And remember, I spoke about at the beginning that the consequences might happen. And consequences need to happen if someone is continuing to exhibit behaviour that we have spoken to them about as not being consistent with what we expect or with what the team expectations are. And one of the reasons that people continue to not meet expectations is because nothing happens when they don't. And the other reason people don't meet expectations is because nothing happened when they did. So that's why the rewards and the potential consequences are important. Now, I'm emphasising consequences because it's important that the person knows, if we don't get these reports right, this is what I might need to do next. If we can't resolve the situation with the backlog, these are the steps I might need to take. And as people in workplaces, it's important that we know that if I do this, this will happen. And that's the reward. And if I do this, this might happen, and that's the consequence. And where the behaviour is, through our conversations, we have been able to see that this wasn't that the computer broke down and they couldn't get access. This wasn't that the other area didn't come forward with the information. This is that they just didn't finish the report. They haven't addressed the backlog. So that's when a consequence needs to happen. But if I don't know what the consequence is likely to be, and then something happens that I consider to be detrimental or adverse, I will consider that a punishment, and that's when I will get upset, not me particularly, but the team member, and that's when I'm likely to start to lodge grievances and concerns. But if it's clear in the conversation that if we're not able to resolve this is the steps I might need to take. If it's not resolved, I need to take the steps. And this is the tough part of management, but it's tougher to not do it, because when I don't do it, then the problems are more likely to escalate. But it's always with facts, and it's always with examples. And it's not enough to say your reports aren't up to scratch, but here's the report you handed in this morning. And here's the one that you handed in 3 days ago that we talked about then, and I'm still seeing the same errors.
Great, thanks, Joan. So Nathan's wondering if you've got any examples of ways to encourage the team to check in with each other. So that sort of peer support as well, which might be helpful in a setting where perhaps a manager or supervisor has quite a lot of direct reports. So, and also just good for team building potentially. So if you've got any thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely, because it's kind of like my soapbox subject, Nathan. It's one of my passions, so thanks for asking the question. As we come back to work, and I'm putting back in inverted commas because I think, we will still have very flexible working arrangements in a lot of workplaces, but as we start to look at what the new world of work will look like, I'm encouraging managers to really put some effort into some team building. Now, there's a couple of reasons for that. A lot of organisations have done a lot of recruitment over the last 2 years. So we have staff members who potentially have not met some of their team members or have not met them very often, who don't really know them. A lot of the, by necessity, a lot of onboarding in the last 2 years has been done remotely and virtually, which is better than nothing, but it's not nearly as good as face-to-face. So I'd be really encouraging everybody to be putting some time aside to get the team together. Doesn't have to be, you know, we don't have to go away for a 3-day residential. It could just be a couple of hours in the office where we're just going to start to set our new culture together. And then we talk about the team expectations. When we say as a team, we're going to be supportive, what does that look like for us? And just to facilitate that conversation, our managers can do this. What I also find, though, you don't need to bring an external person in. Someone from outside the team can be good at doing this, because then the manager can be part of it. If you do choose to bring in an external facilitator, that really works as well. But, you know, make sure that you've given them a good briefing about what it is you're wanting to achieve. And then so then we're going to look as a team, what are the behaviours that we're going to deem to be healthy? What are the behaviours that we want to avoid? Team cultures will form. That's inevitable. But if we don't do it consciously, they will form subconsciously. And that's when we're at risk of getting a toxic culture. So what we want to do is bring this out onto the table. So then some questions you can ask is, you know, how do we check in with each other? Some of your team members are going to be more private than others, and that's absolutely fine. And I don't have to discuss my private life at work. There is no requirement for that. But I do need to be engaging with my team members in ways that are professional and in ways that are conducive to people being able to do their jobs. So our question as a team is, what does that look like for us? And then, as I said earlier, you know, make discussing health and well-being a part of the put it on the team agreements, on the team meeting agendas. And, you know, what are we doing to keep our energy up? What are we doing to keep our motivation up? What are we doing to stay connected? And I think managers have got a perfect opportunity at the moment to say the world of work has never done this before. We have no precedents. So therefore, we have a blank slate that we can create a team culture that we want. What is ours going to look like? And that will then help team members to start to know what the boundaries are, and also how to ask and what to notice. And I really encourage teams to be talking about, you know, each team member, this is what you'll see if I'm doing okay. This is what you might see if I'm not doing so okay. This is what it would be helpful for you to do if you see me doing things that indicate that I'm not having a real good day. And over time, we can't legislate for trust and we can't legislate for connection. But what we can do is put behaviours in place that over time will build the trust and connection. And then team members feel more comfortable about checking in and saying, you know, oh, Joan, I noticed this morning that you didn't have your coffee and you haven't gone around and said hello to everybody. That's not like you. Is everything okay? So team members then learn too how to call the behaviour rather than the opinion. You're looking grumpy today, Joan, or I'm assuming you're tired. But rather, I've noticed you did this morning and that's different to how you normally are. Are you okay? And so we build it. And it will take some time, but it doesn't take a long time. Once we get started, it's amazing how once teams come on board. But you know, for many managers, there's a bit of catch up to do, that the research is suggesting that people have felt disconnected over the last 2 years, that they haven't felt as valued over the last 2 years. And that's just because, you know, we were all trying to grapple with how we were going to do this whole lockdown, isolation, work from home thing. So we've all done the best we can. And now I think it's time to say, what did we learn? What did we do well? What could we have done better? How can we bring this into our new world of work and create the team that everybody's going to feel most comfortable in?
Wonderful, great advice. Just the last question that's come through from the audience is whether you've got any views on the move, or sort of this you know, recent trend of moving from a 5-day working week to a 4-day working week, but without loss of pay. Have you seen that trialled in any workplaces, Joan, or do you have any thoughts on whether that could be something that would assist with, you know, rewarding employees and also still making sure the work gets done?
I've seen it trialled informally. So what I mean by that is just where I've seen flexible workplaces, and particularly over specific situations. So someone sort of says, look, you know, one of my parents is unwell, I need to spend some time with them, and the organisation has sort of reconfigured things. So what we're talking about in a 4-day week where we don't lose pay is, of course, the organisation has an expectation that there's a 5-day week's outputs or outcomes, should I say. So we're moving from input and output to outcomes. So we can, where the organisation or the nature of the teamwork lends itself to it, I think is infinite opportunity for us to be doing just that. But what is important is that we're clarifying what would be a week's worth of outcomes, a 5-day work of outcomes that would be consistent with the role and the level of the person. And then, is that possible to be done in 4 days without burnout? And if so, is that then going to have any level of adverse effect on other team members? So you're not going to be here every Friday, so does that then cause disruption or inconvenience? And I think as long as we go into those conversations with our creative hat on and the clarity, so rather than I still need you to do 5 days work if I'm paying you 5 days pay, but what would 5 days work look like? And how can that be configured? And how can that be done in a way that is seamless for your colleagues? And then I think where we can get answers to those, it's infinitely possible. And that's different to the 4-day work week where we've got 4 days worth of work outcomes. But, you know, I think there's going to be a trend towards it. And the reason for that, of course, is while we were working from home, the lines between work and home blurred. And for many people, it was their first time working from home. And so they've suddenly realised, and I'm talking to a lot of these people, many people are saying to me, I've never wanted to work from home before, but now I've done it. I want to do it more. I want to have more time. COVID also sparked a lot of people to review their commitment to work in terms of, you know, they wanted other things in their life. They want to have a more relaxed life balance, if you like. We don't talk about work-life balance anymore because it's all life. So, yeah, lots of opportunities. I think there's enormous opportunities. And I think what's the challenge for all of us, because we're humans, is to put aside our expectations of the past and walk into the future with a clear, unobstructed view. And that's just really difficult because as humans we have memories and we have ideas of how things should be, and I think it's time to start looking at it, well, not how things should be, but how could things be. We've got the technology to be able to be much more expansive. You know, I'm hearing of people who got stuck overseas during the border lockdowns and they haven't missed a day of work. You know, I know of one particular individual that did 2 years working from what he referred to as home. He went home to India to see his family, got caught up in the situation there, wasn't able to get back into the country, and for all intents and purposes is still working full time and hasn't missed a day's work. So we know it's possible. Yeah. Our obstacle, or I think our challenge for many of us, is how do we step over what's ingrained, you know, and that sort of, you know, the 5-day week is a 5-day week. Well, can we do 5 days work in 4 days without putting ourselves under undue pressure or our colleagues under undue pressure?
Lovely. And Emily's just provided a nice comment there. So in their CLC, they've implemented a 4-day week, but it's still 35 hours over 4 days. And then the office is closed on Wednesdays. And so far, staff feedback has been really positive. So thank you for sharing that, Emily.
Great. Yeah. I think the more we open up our minds and become flexible, but intelligently flexible and strategically flexible, at the end of the day, the goal still has to be that we get our jobs done to the highest possible standard and that our clients are receiving the services that they require and deserve. And I think when we just put that as the dream, there could be all sorts of pathways in different industries. I mean, you know, it means that people will be doing it differently. I'm not sure that it would work so well in the retail, but who knows, you know, but when depending on what we're doing, there's infinite possibility. And that's exciting. I actually feel really excited about it. but important that we do it consciously and strategically, because if we don't, it will happen unconsciously, and that's when suddenly things can go awry because we just haven't kept our finger on the pulse.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Joan, for sharing your knowledge around sustainable leadership, and hopefully there's been some great tips that centres can pick up and implement in their own workplaces. And thanks so much, everyone, for your excellent questions. It's really nice to have extra time to go through all of the questions in a bit more depth.
Yes, no, thank you. The questions were fantastic, and I will get some ideas for authors and resources, Carly, to you over the hopefully by tomorrow morning.
Fabulous, that's perfect, and lots of thank yous coming through, Joan, for you for a great session. I will also just remind everyone that this webinar has been possible through a grant from the Queensland Community Foundation. So this is the second last webinar that we'll have on this wellbeing during COVID program. So it's been great to have you all on board, and please feel free to share this webinar recording and resources with your team as well, or with other colleagues. But for now, I will wrap up the webinar for today. And just lastly, thank you again so much for Joan for your expertise and for contributing to this webinar program across a couple of conference sessions and leadership forum sessions, as well as today's webinar. Hope everyone takes care this week, and we'll see you at our next webinar next week. Make sure you do fill out the feedback survey when it pops up on the screen when the session closes down. Thanks so much. See you later.
Thank you. Bye.